It's been a long time in the making, but this year I'm finally building an outdoor pond. But first, if you're new to the channel, welcome. And if you're a returning subscriber, thank you so much for all your support. Now let's get back to the pond thing. Now it's a pretty common thing to do in the aquarium keeping hobby when the weather gets better and it starts to get warmer into the summer months. And that's for aquarium keepers to start building ponds for their decks and their patios. But if you don't know already, I live in the Pacific Northwest of the United States of America. Our summers are very short and they're not very warm, typically around 70 to 85 degrees maximum. So I've never done a pond before because I've never felt that I could do it in my area. So for the last 4 years, I've never really thought it would be worth my time to build a pond. But this year is different, so I'm gonna go ahead and do it. I've gotten all the supplies I need to build a pond, and I've done it for a relatively cheap cost too. I think in total I spent roughly around $50. So along with the build, I'll walk you through how I managed to keep my costs so low on my first ever pond build on a budget. So first things first, when you're doing a pond build, the first thing you need is a pot. I got pretty lucky. I got a set of 3 of these pots from my local Costco for $20. They're roughly about 5 gallons in size and about 14 inches across at the top. Now, since this is my first ever pond build, I want to keep it simple. I'm just going to use a single pot instead of all 3. I thought about stacking them on top and doing like a little waterfall feature thing, but I think for my first time, I should just keep it simple and start with 1. If this first pond actually works out, maybe I'll build another one later in the summer. But like I said, let's start with 1 and see how it goes. When you're selecting the pot you want to build a pond in, you want to make sure that it has a plug on the bottom. Some pots don't, and you would have to seal it up yourself. But usually if there's a plug on the bottom, it'll hold the water just fine. This one I'm not so sure about, so I'll have to water test it by filling it to the top on my deck and seeing if anything leaks out the bottom. If water does leak out, then I'll have to grab some silicone or some super glue and seal around that plug. But first things first, we gotta test it. All right, so the water is in, which means now all I have to do is sit back and wait and see if this actually holds the water or not. Okay, so it's been a couple days now and this thing holds water just fine. I let it sit out overnight and the temperature got really cold that night as well. So the pot had to experience multiple types of conditions from warm weather, sunshine, and cold at night, and the seal held perfectly fine. There was no leaks whatsoever. So I'm not gonna modify it, I'm just gonna let it be. And if I get a leak later on, then I'll just deal with it in a different way. So with the pot good to go on its own, I think it's time to grab the equipment and grab the plants for this build. Really quick, before I go any farther, I do wanna give a huge shout out and thank you to my good friend Mike from DIY Aqua Pros. Mike is a professional at building ponds in the summertime, and I've spent a lot of time with him conversing about how to build a pond, how to make it successful, and how to do it right. So thank you to Mike for all his help. Without that, I don't know that I'd be setting up this pond today. So if you're not following Mike already, I'll leave the link in the description for his channel. You should go check him out. He's got some great stuff. All right, when it comes to plants, I've gotten several recommendations from friends as to which plants work better than others in pond systems. Some of those plants included things like creeping jenny and variegated water celery. Those plants are not aquarium plants, so I headed off to my local garden center to see if I could find any. And I couldn't find the variegated water celery, but I was able to find the creeping jenny and a couple other plants that I thought would look really cool in here. I ended up leaving the store with 3 plants that cost me in total about $15. And that was some grasses, which I know Coco, my cat, will enjoy chewing on. He already has while I've had the plants sitting on the deck waiting to build this video. And then I was also able to find the creeping Jenny. So these 3 plants will go in the pot, as well as some aquarium plants that I'm gonna pull from other tanks. So when it comes to cost, we're looking at $20 for the pot, and then $15 for the plants. So that has me spending $35 so far, which gives me $15 left on that $50 budget. In order to save some costs, it requires you to be creative. In this case, like I already mentioned, I'll be pulling plants out of some of my other tanks. This will allow me to save money by just using those plant trimmings. After the trimming session, I was able to pull a good amount of plants out, including some Sagittarius subulata, Vallisneria, and some red root floaters, all of which came out of my South America tank, and I think I'm gonna pull some Rotala out of the other tank behind me. So now that I've got the plants, it's time to get the substrate and start building the pond. Now for the substrate, I'm gonna be using some sand. Since a majority of these plants are gonna be suspended at the water level, as well as being floating plants, I don't need aqua soil or any special substrate. Just regular sand will do just fine. Now looking to save money because substrate can be expensive, I went into my aquascaping closet and looked to see if I had any extra sand. I've got a small bag of this like no-name play sand that will work just fine. And if I need extra, I've also got quite a bit of UNS Contra sand that I can throw on the top. Just, you know, to be safe. It's like 20 pounds of sand. Now, I don't think I need a lot of sand because looking at the bottom of this pot, there's not a lot of surface to cover. And I don't need it that deep since there's not gonna be a lot of plants planted in the substrate. So therefore, to save water space for the fish that will eventually go in here, I'm not gonna put a ton of sand in, just enough to create a little bit of a substrate layer where some beneficial bacteria can hide, as well as some plants can be stuck into. Okay, I'm gonna do a pretty fun little trick. In the areas where I plan to plant some of the Vallisneria and Sagittarius subulata, because this is an inert sand substrate, I wanna add some root tabs. And I'll be using the APT Jazz root tabs. You can find an affiliate link down in the video description for these things. And you can get 15% off at checkout with my code. But what I'm gonna do is the areas where I'm gonna plant, I'm gonna stick, just kind of burrow a little hole down here. And I need a bigger hole than that. I need to go down to the bottom like that. I'm just gonna break these things up. And I'm just gonna dump the root tabs there. And I'm gonna do the same thing for the other section. Grab another pair of root tabs, crack this open, pour it in. And then when I plant right there, the plants will have nutrition in the substrate. So there you have it. The pond is planted, which means all that's left to do is sit back and enjoy it. I think that once the pond is cycled and the weather is a tiny bit warmer, I'm gonna add some Medaka rice fish into this pond just because I've never kept them before and I think they're pretty cool. So I'm gonna take a stab at them this year. Like I just mentioned, I've never kept rice fish before. So if you have any recommendations for cool ones that are easy to take care of, drop them in the comments below and I'll take a look at what you recommend. I do really quickly wanna revisit the topic of the cost of this pond. If you don't add up all the things that I was able to pull from my extra supplies, which I'm sure a lot of you have, then the whole entire build cost me $35. So a deck pond is relatively cheap to make if you're good at resourcing other things from your other tanks and if you have spare supplies that you can use. If you are in a situation where you don't have extra things like that lying around, then I think the total cost would roughly get you around $50 to $60-ish for the whole entire setup that I just built. So that's it for this video. I had a blast building this pond for the first time ever. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you're not subscribed, please go ahead and do so. And as always, I'll see you in the next one.